Hey, hope all is well. So, for today's lecture, I want to go over noise. And because of my background in statistics, it's going to have more of that perspective along with just a business perspective as well. So, I believe noise is a great lecture topic because it kind of stems off my last lecture on biases. And bias, noise, and variance are actually the three-headed dragon that cause machine learning errors. And bias, there was a lot to research and a lot to do, so that was really fun. Thing with variance is it's just the fluctuation between the input data sets. So I don't know if that's like a whole lecture, but maybe we'll see if later on I want to touch base and just add on to that. But noise is actually very interesting because it's actually very harder to detect. Now, biases, they're very there's so many studies on it. There's articles, tons of books, because it's very easy to detect because it's very causational. Event A occurs, event B happens, and it's easy to see where the disconnect was. So it's kind of like a cause and effect. So biases are easy to pick up, but what happens with noise is that they're often it's very often that like it's unintentional and you don't even realize it's playing a role. Now, let's use the following for an example. You read a passage and the passage goes like, there is an individual named John. John is studying accounting at a university with a minor in music. John is also in a band and he loves to play the guitar. Now, what's more likely? John is an accountant or John is an accountant that plays guitar in a band? So, reading that passage, it's easy to like just be like, hey, John's an accountant that plays in a band, right? But if you think about it, just saying John is an accountant already incorporates the second message, but now you have to go one step further to verify it. Now you have to make sure he plays in the band. Whereas if you just said John is accountant, that completes the requirements on both topics. So noise is pretty much just added information that you don't really need to make a inference or a conclusion per se. And hopefully after the lecture you'll understand it a little better. Now, a lot of biases could occur in many ways, but main ways that noise actually occurs, and it's actually a big influence, is when it comes down to judgment. When an individual has to make a decision or make a judgment about something, noise plays a very big role, and it's often very overlooked, and that's why it's like that's why I'm very happy that there's finally studies coming out and kind of red flagging it, because it comes from like all aspects, the medical profession, the legal profession, the business profession as a whole. And let's give an example of all three. So there have been studies that have shown that a person is more likely to get parole if their parole hearing is after the judges had their lunch, and it significantly drops if the parole hearing is just before the judge is about to go for lunch. So that the fact that the judge is hungry or not, it's not intentional. No, I at least I hope not, but it is likely to occur or play a part. That's why it's so hard to detect. And another example would be is if you give the same radiologist the same x-ray for diagnosis, depending on when you give that radiologist, there's a 20% chance that the second diagnosis will be different than the first. Now, why does that occur? That's what we call noise. We're not really sure what's going on, and we want to reduce that. And it becomes larger in other aspects, or like different areas. For example, there's a book by, I forgot his name. I know his name is David. I can't recall his last name, but he wrote a book, and I believe the title was just Noise. So that, I guess that plays in pretty well for this lecture. So in Noise, David K. That's the closest I'm gonna get. So in Noise, David K. Illustrated the effect of noise in an insurance company. So what happened in this example was I don't know if he was doing the consulting or like the management aspect of it, or it was just another study. But what ended up happening was they gave the same case to two different underwriters in the same company to come up with the premium for the case and the case value. And the management team, they expected that they'll give two different answers, two different people, two different perspective, and they really expected the difference to be between 5 to 10%. But much to their surprise, the discrepancy between the two was closer to 50%. Now, if you just scale that up to multiple underwriters with a discrepancy of 50%, there's either very low premium for the risk taken on, or not enough reserves for rectifying a claim or processing a claim, which in the long term could be detrimental to the company's health. And that's why it's kind of like important to limit noise when needed. And the few ways you could rectify noise is if you take human judgment out of it. Now, what do I mean by that? So the radiologist example was, you have a certain x-ray, you get a diagnosis, right? So if you set up algorithms that like calculate the that read the picture and then gives the same output, that reduces the human judgment that comes in. Or in the insurance company example, if there were set rules that this is being insured for this much, what's the optimal premium to charge? Or the premium is this much, what's the optimal coverage to give? Now, once you have these hard, fast rules, it becomes easier to make the decisions because you're just going down a checklist. Like, if you see a lot of pilots, what they do before going to a flight, no matter how minor, they'll check every indicators that they have just to make sure that it's working properly. And wherever there's judgment, there's going to be noise. So the best way to do it is just take the human judgment out of it. Just make it, just run it with algorithms. And there was additional study in which they ran a certain criteria in which artificial intelligence would determine whether the person should be eligible for parole or not. And a judge did it, and they wanted to test how much the AI would let go, or how much would the judge let go, and how many of the people that have been let go back into normal society will relapse back into the prison system. And much to their chagrin, what ended up happening was computers made better prediction than the human judges. So once you take out noise per se, it is easy to rectify. And I know it makes no sense that professionals like radiologists, judges, or underwriters will make that mistakes because they're highly respected. They have studied extensively in the subject that they're asked to make a judgment on. But if you kind of take a step back and look at the bigger picture, they're also the most suspect to fall for noise. And the nature of their work, less than the individual, the nature of the work execution is the cause of it. Now, let me elaborate about what I mean by that. I'm just going to take judges for example. A lot of time a judge does a clerkship, then they become a judge in their own court. And once you're a judge in your own court, there's so many times that you've made a decision that it's been your decision, and a lot of times you don't really get to confer with anyone else and see other perspectives. It becomes easy to just get caught up in your own bubble and not realize that, one, you don't know what you don't know, and two, if you're intaking more information than needed or not taking enough information. And it's nothing against the ability of the judge. It's just a lot of the judges work solo, and once teamwork gets taken out, a person does become more susceptible to fall for noise per se. And this can't always happen in I guess for judges, but one way that business executives have overcome this, and it's actually a great method if you could if you could incorporate it in your company, is have a boardroom meeting, right? And throughout the meeting, set up anonymous surveys. And the reason they should remain anonymous is so you could check the temperature in the room without someone falling for social biases. Because another noise, so judges are extreme example of what happens when you're extremely isolated, and noise could occur. But another reason noise occurs is because social influence. Humans are social animals at the end of the day, and it's hard not to care about what someone else thinks. And especially if you're surrounded by colleagues that you respect, or if there's a colleague that has, I guess, more influence. And people with more influence tend to speak first too, which could, I guess, drift someone else's ideas. Like, they could be thinking one thing, but once they hear, like, I guess their supervisor say it, they're more inclined to disagree. And though it's not ideal, it is very common of an occurrence. So that's why the anonymous surveys throughout, depending on how many check-ins you want to do with the room, this works more well with like a boardroom meeting rather than just like a typical meeting with staff. So depending on the purposes. So if you could just like have a check-in and see everyone's perspective, it could help red flag something that one person didn't see, or it could bring up a point that was almost overlooked. So that's always good. Just a different perspective, and just kind of having to stop and think a little. Because with biases, it's quite instinctive to make those errors. But you need a little bit of statistics background to realize where the noise is actually occurring and how to rectify it. And the thing with noise is sometimes it's just not worth it to rectify, because going similar to judges, right? Teachers are in a similar predicament. Now, for a teacher, same thing. They get a job, they get some supervision on how they're teaching and the metrics they follow, but after a point, they're kind of grading on their own. And where for an insurance company that, depending on the size of the company, that could be handling over 100 million assets under management, it's often worth it to have 2 or 3 different underwriters look at the same case and value it, because that would reduce an individual error, and you could average out for the best thing, because wisdom of a crowd phenomenon, which is actually a pretty really cool phenomenon that helps prevent noise. But yeah, but you wouldn't want 5 teachers to read a 9th grader's essay. That's just not the proper use of allocations. And yes, it's important, but you also have to, you can't make the cure problem, like the cure, worse than the problem. And allocation management comes into a play for that. And so going back to what, kind of summing up the lecture, we learned that noise is just either excessive information you don't need, or kind of like your judgmental errors of something that could be overlooked, such as the weather, your mood, just human error in general. And though it's often accounted for in corporations, as we could tell by the insurance company that gave the same case to 2 different underwriters, the discrepancy could go up to as much as 50%, which is really interesting, like highlight and kind of like observe to either prevent or rectify if it's too late. And yeah, so noise, bias, and variance, they're the ones that make up the errors in machine learning. And speaking of machine learning and error, yes, algorithms are always better than human calculations, but it's also important to recognize that algorithms are built by humans, and sometimes you have to be very careful of the data set that you put into an algorithm, because I didn't really think about this as much until listening to David Kay's book. Again, that's Noise, great book, check it out. And he said something along the lines of, what if a neighborhood is just over policed due to what we know, the social climate? So a neighborhood is over policed. Now what happens is, when you build the algorithm for preventing crime, and you're putting in your current inputs of where the police location is allocated, the police force is allocated. Now, unintendedly, and due to no one's fault, there's a high chance that the algorithms could just reinforce the same over policing in the same neighborhood. And now something that started off as a human, it is a human shortcoming to not view someone as equal. So I will go as far as to saying a shortcoming in humans is now accidentally picked up by algorithms and reinforced. without us realizing. So it's a interesting trend to follow, and something that I guess I would advise everyone to be careful of and to be mindful of, and just treat people nicely, and hopefully this doesn't happen. But with that, I think this is a good place to leave off. May is almost done, so I just quickly want to touch base regarding my future outputs of these videos, because I have come to realize that chances of me making a structured lecture video series that I had in mind, most likely not going to do that. So I am having a great time recording these lectures, making them impromptu. Once I really sat down to think about to really structure a lecture series and all that, and I was just like, let's just keep this a hobby. Let's keep this a hobby. So going forward, more of these just things that I'm learning. I just like to like reinforce, like I like giving a lecture on things that I have recently learned, because as I'm setting up these lectures, it just reinforces it, and making these videos is just really cool. And it's a good experience, 'cause from where I started previously to like this video. I am very happy with how far I've came. And if down the line I have more time to devote to this, sure. But as for now, I'm just gonna keep it a hobby, and just create lectures when I can. And I want to set a bare minimum of 2 per month, but I would like to do more than that. I do want my output to be more, but I guess setting a bare minimum, because I have been doing 2 a month and it has been very easy and kind of chill for me. So I like the flow, so why mess it up? But either way, with everything happening in the world, I appreciate you for spending some time with me. Take care.